welcome to the Starting Over Podcast. I'm your host, Edward Shelton, aka Dark Logos, and this is a show where we look at the strategies, tactics, and mechanics behind the game of heroclix. Yeah, it's been a while. Sort of sorry about that. The main reason, I won't front, is just there's nothing to talk about. And you might say, well, Dark Logos, we have all these previews, and this, that, and the other, and you did the Corey stuff. I'm like, yeah, I did some Corey stuff. I had 2 weeks of insane editing on the Corey that just sucked up all my time as well. But realistically, from a tactic standpoint, there hasn't been anything to talk about. And for some people that are newer to the show, you might be wondering, well, why am I not talking about the newest, latest, greatest preview that's out, and everyone's talking about blankety blank blank. Well, usually I don't talk about things until they're official. Like, we know that this is like the final version and this is the full set. And the main reason is that there's times in the past where I've jumped on this is what it says right now on Realms, and I was wrong, and so my review wasn't, exactly correct. So that's why. But I've also been dealing with a problem, and the problems have primarily been trying to figure out what to play for Tulsa, and then also what to play at Nationals and Origins. And I've been going back and forth with some of my teammates and a few other people. And the issue for me, I was saying, and what we're going to really go into today's show, and I talked about it in one episode of the Corey, is creativity. Creativity in this game sometimes can be really simple if you find a good mechanic that's worthwhile and has a distinct, unique advantage. Creativity becomes hard when the established meta has so many options that it's almost impossible to deal with. And so, for example, I think we're going into the second coming of the Ghost Rider Heroes for Hire meta, whereas there's only really going to be like one build going into Origins, maybe two, and outside of that, you're not going to see much else in top 16. Top 32, you might see some things, but top 16, definitely not going to be that diverse. And some of you might be saying, well, Dark Logos, are you going to go into how to beat Jakeem Faust and blah, 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 this, that, and the other? And truth be told, I'm not going to say it's impossible to beat Jakeem Faust, because Jakeem Faust will play Jakeem Faust. It's just that the unique advantages of Jakeem Faust are so high that not playing it, you have to account for so many variables that it's a little annoying. Let me rephrase it. Not just a little annoying, a lot annoying. And let me sort of break down in part why. All right, so when we look at creativity, you first have to establish what's established meta. Now, creativity isn't necessarily counter meta or anti meta, and that would be a misnomer. But where you're more looking at is establishing a set of variations that aren't normally looked at. That's one way of looking at it. And there's also creating something completely new. And creating something completely new, most players don't tend to do that when it comes to high-level competitive, versus every week competitive, because in every week competitive, the stakes are a lot lower. Like, you can get that little plastic man on eBay. You can't necessarily get, 100 rock points, every weekend. So there is that. So if we go into like a minor variation, if someone says like, yeah, I'm going to play Jakeem Faust, you have an option of playing Jakeem Faust with a round table, with Supreme Intelligence. You can put Eclipso onto Jakeem. You can put whatchamacallit. You can put Brainiac onto Faust. You can, forfeit entities completely and play another 50-point figure, such as, let's just say, Jean Grey. Or you can play a bunch of, you can play like a couple of thugs and then play a bunch of ID cards with your Supreme Intelligence. There's a lot of variable options that are there for you to actually like think about. And so the problem, the way that I see it, that really just sinks in, is that once you start down that initial path of, okay, Jakeem Faust is the best thing, then you're trying to figure out what best way for your play style, or do you think is best overall, that you can beat other similar builds or beat most of the things that are out there. And so that's where you start seeing the creativity when it comes to adaptation. Okay, and so eventually you get a couple of variations, and those variations become standard. And then the amount of variations you can do starts to become inefficient. Okay, like let's say, for example, you're able to use Overdrive, 2 Doc Ock, and what's his name, Chameleon, and I think I'm just going to push it and say for limited, like, then you put in Kingpin. Okay, I don't think that that's 300 points, but let's just say for right now it is. All right, so you do that, and you have, Peggy Carter on the sideline, let's just say Bizarro Green Arrow on the sideline, and just for giggles, 50-point Green Arrow, okay, or something like that. All right, so those are your guys on the sideline. All right. Now that you have, those options for Chameleon, you could go up against like another Sinister Syndicate team, and they could be like, well, I'm going to run 1 Doc Ock, Speed Freak, Dr. Killebrew, and maybe some Perplexer or something with Overdrive. Okay, now you have a variation. Okay, and now you're able to do some different silliness with Dr. Killebrew. You're able to have an 11 attack because of Overdrive, instead of getting that 11 attack from Kingpin. Okay, I'm not Overdrive, Speed Freak. Instead of getting it from Kingpin, and then you have some other like distinct advantages that you have and don't have. Like the Doc Ock team has several outwits that they could use, whereas the Dr. Killebrew Doc Ock team really doesn't. But you also have a hypersonic speed option with the Dr. Killebrew team. So people can say like, hey, look, you're going to get mapped with the standard Sinister 6 map. I mean, Sinister 16, whereas the other team you won't get map, and then you could sort of counter argue it's like, what map does Overdrive not work efficiently on? And that's a serious, consideration. Now you could say like on blank this map, okay. Now let's put Jakeem aside, and let's just say that the first Sinister Syndicate team is the main Sinister Syndicate team that's been winning events. All right. Now you're in this situation where the advantage is the same in terms of mobility, but the disadvantage really just comes down to is the number of attacks, on one side, versus the overall damage output of those attacks on the other end. So those elements are there. And so you have to consider like which is a better advantage, being able to have a Doc Ock with a 11 attack and doing 4 damage and having 1 outwit, or having 2 Doc Ocks with 11 attack and doing 3 damage. So those are like little things that you're looking at with the variations. The prime example I can think of recently is this cat got 4th place at Majestics, and he was playing Krang, but he wasn't playing Krang with Justin, which made me sort of step back and say, huh? No Justin? And part of me, like everybody else is, in the back of their mind, you're sort of saying like, well, what's wrong with this picture? Like my predisposition to having Justin and Krang together is being messed up by this weirdness that you're presenting. But in reality, what happened was this guy just said, like, I can get X, Y, and Z advantages just by not playing Justin. And I can have a more stable Krang, but a Krang that's not running all over the place, taking tons of unnecessary damage. And I can sort of respect that. I can respect that. But when he went up against PJ, it just proved like, no, this is why you have the variation with Justin, or really phrase it, that's why Justin becomes primary, and all the little secondary dudes outside of Justin are pretty much just a rotating menagerie of people. Okay, you can find other little 20-point people or little 15-point people or 30-point people to back up Krang, but primarily Justin and Krang are ride till you die buddies. They're there to the end. So those are some interesting situations that keep presenting themselves when we start looking at core teams and the variations. Now, in heroclix, unlike a lot of other games, people mainly in heroclix try to find variations. And if variations aren't easily possible, they'll start complaining that variations aren't easily possible, which is something that's really unique to heroclix. I think it's a good thing, but I also do think it's unique. And so when we start looking at the culture in and of itself, when it comes to definitely like trying to find our own variation, whatever commentator, whatever podcast, whatever YouTube show that you'll look at or listen to, they're going to present the little tweak or the different outlook or the play style adjustment for a team, versus like if it's a card game, it's like you do this, then you mill for that, and then after you mill, you power up this creature, and then you hit for blank amount, which triggers this other card, which you play, and then you win the game. That's a lot of decks, and it's not just like Magic, like Universal Fighting System. When I was playing that, was very similar. Maybe not as fast once they started, toning things down, but it was pretty close. It was like hit this. Once you hit this, tap this thing, charge up this attack, it's unblockable, GG. But the thing with Universal Fighting System, unlike heroclix, is that the deck lists were very tight. Like you had to like have an exact deck list, and if you didn't, your deck just didn't work. You couldn't do any variations because everything in that deck was 100% mandatory. Now, let's sort of take a step back and look at trying to build something completely different, and why building something completely different necessarily is not counter meta. Now, some people might say, well, Dark Logos, if I'm going to build a team, then I have to deal with the main teams that are out there, and I have to build stuff that beats the main teams that are out there. And it's like, yeah, but you don't necessarily have to beat teams that or make a team. Let me rephrase that. You don't have to make a team full of silver bullets. Now, I know people that do that, and that has a classical approach of anti-meta to it, or counter-meta to it. But packing silver bullets, the thing I found being a coach lately, is that it has short-term rewards and long-term detriments. The short-term rewards is, of course, like the player starts to win more. And that seems like cool and great, and there's no downsides to that. The long-term is that the player starts getting used to having the figure cover for play weaknesses. Okay? So there's some things that I've argued with my teammates about previously. I would tell them, like, straight up, it's like, you're picking this character to cover for your lack of blank. Okay? And I'll even say with myself, I started noticing that with myself when someone brought up to me, hey, Edward, you pack 50% of your force's support. 50% or more of your force's support. And I sat back and I was like, no, I just have it so that if you hit me, then this guy can, anybody can turn into an attacker. I can, recover most people if you fail to, like, kill something, blah, 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 blah. And I really was not receptive to it. And then when I sat back one day and I actually, like, looked, now this is back when I didn't just use HT Realms Team Builder. I was doing, like, the math manually. I sat back and I looked inside of my heroclix notebook, and I just said, wow, I have Domino on here. I have White Lantern Flash on here. I have, this Destiny on here. I have this other, Perplexer Prober on here. And I was like, yeah, over half of my team is support. And what it really came down to when I started to look at that is that my placement was weak. My placement was very weak. So I was covering up my weakness in placement by, for lack of better words, just having things that patched it up. Oh, okay, so this guy now has a 20 defense, back when that was actually something. Okay, so he's going to be really hard to hit. Okay, if they do hit that character, he's deep enough where I can potentially have my 2 medics can heal him back up. I had ciphers for Perplex and stealing team abilities to discourage people from, playing a bunch of mystics so I wouldn't take unnecessary damage. Like, there were so many elements in play that I looked at my support that, yeah, I was hiding my weakness, not even very well, and so I had to come back and I had to address, like, all right, why am I having this problem? Well, I'm not counting range. I'm not looking at how I'm actually going to approach. I'm not looking at how my opponent can approach, and so it might seem subtle, but really the best way to sort of start looking at alternative types of play is to really start examining how you play yourself. And that's a key element, is how you play yourself. Because I remember the first time I was challenged by a player that I knew named Jay. And Jay told me, hey, Edward, you always play all these little guys. You always sort of play like a weird version of Swarm. Why don't you go and play a tent pole? And I'm like, well, tent poles suck, blah, blah, blah. These things happen. And then he's like, well, really look at it, and then you play a tent pole, and then you see what happens. Like, you play 3 figures or 2 figures, and then see what happens. And one of them has to be over this point value. So I took up the challenge, and then I saw all the things that I had to overcome with that hurdle of having a few pieces. And then that forced me to really like examine a couple of things. Like number one, like I couldn't have bad placement if I only had like 2 to 3 figures. The second thing is that I had to focus on my attacks counting a lot more. Also, I needed to convert to attacks equals KOs, not attacks equals crippled mindset. A lot of people have an attack equals cripple mindset. So that's something as well. When I took a time and I started to look at the figures that I needed, not only that could do enough damage, but sort of assess in the current game at that time was how much damage did I need to do to actually KO something, and who was able to do that. So those key elements there reveal a lot, and I do mean that when it comes down to starting to play differently or starting to create something different. Because if you're looking at run and gun, and run and gun is winning, and then you're trying to make a defensive team that also runs and guns, it won't work. It just doesn't work. So you have to find a play style that's disruptive to what the current play style is, which means that you can't try to mimic the elements of the current play style. So that at first seems like, wow, like you're telling me, Dark Logos, that I need to look at a play style first before I look at figures. And I'm like, yeah, that's one way of doing it. The looking at figures part becomes hard, and so I'm going to sort of just throw this out here. I spent a lot of time looking at resources. I looked at Supreme Intelligence, and I looked at all the cards that you can have for the round table. I looked at Rock of Eternity, and I looked at Pandora's Box. Okay? And I started asking myself some questions. Currently, right now, what sort of mindsets and what sort of play styles do those resources encourage you to have? Okay? And so I looked at that, and then I started asking myself, are there any play styles that we really haven't looked at that often that you could also use these resources with? So, for example, like, could you play like a little slower paced team with Rock of Eternity? And I looked at that for a bit. I also looked at, how many different ways could you, focus on using the round table, like mainly as like a stat table or a power table. How would you utilize that to better, use, since most people don't use it that way. And there's some cool things that showed up. But what I started to realize is that the efficiencies that I was coming out wasn't matching the efficiencies that the standard play was creating. And since I wasn't hitting that same space, or I wasn't hitting similar notes or getting similar types of results, then I had to sort of resign, like saying like, okay, I myself cannot make this do blank blank blank. Okay, I can't make it do blank blank blank. So since it doesn't meet these metrics, it doesn't mean that it's impossible for it to meet these metrics, but I personally can't have them meet these metrics. Okay, and that's an important thing to keep in mind, is recognizing your own limitations in building. You could try to say like, oh, but look, like, PJ did this, Easton did that, I should be able to also do blankety blank blank blank. And my comeback to that really is this: like, did you spend the time that Easton and PJ put in, to create stuff? Did you, have a HeroClix, network of friends that are there to help you get better? Are you, taking the time to listen to some outside opinions and critiques on what you're trying to make? Those are some honest questions that a lot of people don't want to answer, or they don't want to get into. They just want to be like, well, here's something unique and everybody should respect me because it's unique and different. And you'll get the initial like hand clap. But until you're able to prove that's effective, then it's sort of egotistical. One example is Roni KJS, or Kyrie. He did really well in a Georgia Rock not too long ago, using a atypical Justice League team. And it was worth respecting because he got 4th place. Okay. Now, if someone just showed me that team and they were like, this showed up to a rock, and I'm like, okay, whatever. Good for that guy. Okay. But he actually placed. So that changes things. Okay. That shows you, like, freaking mad skills he has. And then B, it also shows you how someone was able to take another outlook on the selection of figures out there, and then was able to come to some different conclusions and make something that was viable. Okay, who thought Pride Support, Green Lantern, and Metamorpho together would be a good idea? That's the issue. I mean, like, that's a serious question. Like, who would have thought that was a good idea? And how many people, like, actually would have invested in looking at those two figures at all for a modern age tournament? I mean, not modern age tournament, Rock Limited tournament. Like, probably no one. All right, so there's a lot to, like, look at. Okay, so then when we go in and if you're still, like, saying, like, okay, I'm going to go full on counter meta, and because I can't get anything else to work, and I'll sort of reiterate this: if you go full counter meta, you still have to understand how your style of play is going to adapt when you play something else that you're not designed to have a 90% win rate against. Okay? Because there's always some guy. Like I already told you before, HeroClix community really emphasizes, creativity, and there's people out there that's going to have their own take on it, and they don't want to be like everybody else. You're bound to play that person in a major tournament. In the locals, you're able to gauge that a bit more, and I really would say this: in locals, there is more of a scope of variety than there is at bigger tournaments. Bigger tournaments, you have a lot less diversity at certain points in the game. Okay? Once something is established as winning and has won a lot, then the diversity goes down. If a new set has destabilized things, then people will always gravitate to the obvious destabilizers, and then from that point you'll start to see, everything reshake down. But if you're going into that counter build, understand you're hurting your growth. Instead of trying to create a situation where you have a 60% win rate, and it requires your skill to be on par, and you're depending on the figures to cover up for your lack of skill, then understand you're slowing your overall growth. Okay, and you're not seeing some key answers that you need to see in the long term as a player. All right, so I'm just making that clear. But if you're going to go down this route, the first thing that you have to look at is what are the most commonly used pieces in the last 6 to 8 tournaments. And you're looking at like top 4, top 8, depending on the size of the tournament. Once you start looking at that, you can establish a trend. So let's just say the trend is pogs, or the trend is improved targeting ignores elevation, and this map keeps showing up. Okay, or you have long clicks of life, or you have like 8 probs on a team. However that happens. Okay, so once you establish whatever the trends are, you're going to have at least 4 to 5 key trends. If you can't see 4 to 5 key trends, then there's either 2 things that are going on. Either A, we've hit a singularity, and then that happens all the time. You hit a design singularity. We've hit the most efficient build teams, a la Heroes for Hire. It's the most efficient team. Okay, or 2 is that you're not looking hard enough. And I don't mean that just to be derogatory, but again, you have to put the work in. And if you just think you could just show up and be like, hey guys, I looked at the top 8 for the last 6 tournaments, and I saw that Krang was in the last top 6, or we're in the, 6, we're in the finals of the 6 of the last, few tournaments. And so I'm going to just build stuff to counter Krang. And then, Justin was there, so I know I just need to go kill Justin. And, I saw that there was a night nurse on a bunch of other teams. And, of course, there was a Flash. So I got something for the Flash if I see the Flash too. Okay, so that's 3 elements instead of 4, and they're figures. And you really haven't resolved like what your key problems are. So you are like, how are you dealing with Krang? Are you dealing with the mobility? Are you trying to kill Justin so that he doesn't have multiple attacks? Are you trying to solve for his stats? Same thing when you're trying to deal with Flash. Like, are you trying to solve for Flash's movement? Are you going to try to solve for Flash's stats? Are you trying to, create something in which he, Flash can't kill you, or he can't run away? Like, what are you trying to do? All right. So these things become important when you're looking at trends. Now, again, trends do not predict the future. Trends do not predict the future. Trends gives you a scope of what's probable. And a lot of people might say, like, man, that's not encouraging. And I'm like, yeah, it's not that easy. And I've been doing competitive tournaments for over 5 years now, like high level competitive tournaments. And the trends issue, trends are good so that you can be prepared ahead of time during practice, so that you can start playing around and saying, like, okay, if I see this, I play like this. If I see this other thing, I play like this. It lets you start building practice teams that may not be spot on what your opponent is going to play, but it's similar to what could possibly be played, so that you already know, like from your variables perspective, on what you're actually going to use, or what you're actually going to see and what you're actually not going to see. And again, it also comes down to you also knowing how the style of play for that team actually is. So if you look at something like Marshall Lawling's, I think it was like Blizzard, Phantom Girl, and something else team. I forgot what it was. He had like a perpetual attacking, sort of team. But if you didn't see Marshall play it, you couldn't practice against it to do the things that you needed to do. And so right there creates your first problem, which is you're not able to adapt or even practice to what is an actual threat. All right. So, again, like I said, trends, they help you get a base understanding of what's going on or what the direction that the game is going to be going. And that's mainly it. You always are going to have outliers. You're going to have somebody that's going to possibly bring something that completely disrupts your team. So be aware of the elements that disrupts your team and how you're going to handle them. And if you look at the disruption and that factor is really common, such as you need all of your movement and enter characters that affect movement, then how are you going to play around that? How does that affect your tempo? How does that affect how you play? Versus, people then saying, oh, well, Turtle is still a thing. Turtle hasn't shown up for 6 months now, but he possibly could. So I'm not going to pick anybody with high mobility. I'm going to pick a bunch of characters with sidestep. It's like, no, that's dumb. That's real dumb. So you start to see the limitations there is in trying to build in a counter meta or anti meta, mainly because you're constantly just looking at this beats this, and Spock beats Lizard or whatever, that sort of thing. It's like, no, if you play like that, then you're setting yourself up for hard losses and hard wins. Okay, the soft losses and the soft wins are usually where higher level play is at. There's not too many, and I mean they do happen, but once you get into top 8, top 4, there's very few hard losses. And even on the quarry, sometimes I'm just like, how did this should have been a hard loss against so and so, and they won. So, anyway, so just progressing on. Like once you have whatever you have done, it's good to have people to talk to and to play test with. And I've had some ideas here recently where I was like, well, what if I do this? Or what if I do that? I think this is what I need to be blankety blank, but I'm not quite sure. There's this other stuff. And so when I finally get a team down, I usually have a core group of people I always end up talking to. I usually start off talking with my, the guy I work with, Jake, and we throw stuff around. And so I'll either then go talk to Wes or KJ. And then once I finish with one of them, I'll talk to the other one. And then sometimes, depending on the situation, I'll talk with, I'll talk to some people that I do the quarry with at times. Sometimes it'll be Aaron. Sometimes it'll, I haven't talked to David about stuff for a while. But yeah, and sometimes I'll talk to King Juggernaut himself, which those conversations are interesting. But I have a range of people in which I can bounce stuff off of, and for people who don't know who King Juggernaut is Jamie Jordan. So, and anyway, but there's people I'll bounce stuff off against, and then they'll come back and they're real with me, and they'll say like, look, man, this is good. They'll be polite and say, that's a cute trick you have there, but this won't work because of this. And so I'll take all those elements into play, and if I start seeing or hearing the same comments over and over again, then it lets me know that there's enough of a skilled player base to look at the situation or look at this team, and they would have other elements on their team that would either hard counter or soft play against it, that there's nothing that I can really do about it. And then there's also just functionally the shortcomings of the team. I mean, hey, I don't just, poop gold. Some days it's just like, oh, that came out of my heroclix brain. Oh man, can't believe that. So that's also an element as well. So once you get the feedback going, then you're able to start making tweaks. And then after you make the tweaks, you can either determine if the idea is solid and you need to go into, like I would say, post-production on it and play testing, or you just need to, tweak it or let the whole thing go. A majority of times, from my personal experience, I've gone through about 4 to 5 creative ideas before I actually hit that key element that I was looking for. Other times, you can hit that precipice of madness if you don't let it go, and I've been there, and it's not a fun place. When you put excessive stress on yourself, you start having visions and dreams, and no, that's not a good place to be. It's not a healthy place to be as a human. But because of that, knowing when to back off and get some rest is also key. But once you finalize whatever you made, when you finalize it, run it through its paces, and if it works well, then be confident with it and accept the results. And that's another hard thing that I think people have a problem with, is accepting results. Now, the reason why I say that is, after you put in all that work, it's easy for folks to say, Jakeem is cheap, and only lazy players play Jakeem. And that's not fair because, I put in all this time and work to make this team, and that guy just net decked. And, that sucks. And since he net decked, he should be punished, blah, 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 blah. Or, oh, look, it's just the same old blah, blah, blah. And, and look at me, I'm great because I played blankety blank. It's so easy to let pride and ego get into things. And it creates a series of self-destructive delusions to justify your position. And I mean, I've seen it with myself. I've seen it with family members, which is a whole different thing. And I've seen it with heroclix players. That you get to that point where you get high off your own supply that you just didn't realize, like, look, this team has limitations. It's not like the second coming of a world championship team. Okay? And I know for myself, like in terms of, being in a position of displacing blame, or even sort of like, I'll give you an example of madness one time. This is an older example. I haven't had the oh my gosh meltdown in a while. But I was building for Gen Con. That tells you how long ago this was. I was building for Gen Con, and I was talking to Mace, and we were up like late on a weekend, and we were just talking about teams, and he's just like, look, you need to play this. You really need to. You need to play this. You have to play. Was it not Bill Agent of AIM? Bill Agent of AIM is dumb. He's going to be everywhere. You got to play it. We look at all these maps. He can just shoot you anywhere. You can have the main guy shoot anywhere. You got to play him. And you got to deal with the entities, and you have to shell out the money for the entities. Blah, 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 blah. They're going to be everywhere. You got to play them. Okay, so I'm arguing with Mace, and that was our relationship. We had this, like, we argue like a married couple, and I'm going back and forth with him, and I said some of the stupidest things that, when I look back at it, I should never have said. And I kept saying I was going to win the world championship with Jon Stewart. Now, for anybody that's familiar with Jon Stewart is not a bad piece. Jon Stewart has a stupid far range. He is the best Jon Stewart we've ever had. Okay? But Jon Stewart is stupid level expensive. And add in entities, Bill, Agent of AIM, and, no TK, no prob, and the resources that I'd have to use, being a lantern. It was going to be a hot mess. And so I put out like probably 8 teams to Mace, and he like a good friend, he was just like, no, this is dumb. You can't play this. Don't waste your time and money going to Origin if you're going to play this mess. And I came back and I said, I want to prove that black heroclix don't suck, and I am going to win with Jon Stewart. And he said, dude, that's not your place to win that. That's not your fight to win. Why bring that here? Why try to prove that now? And I say that looking at Jakeen. I say that now looking at Jakeen. Like, I want to win with a black heroclix figure. And I'm like, oh gosh, I just don't want to win with that figure. I just don't want to win with that figure. I don't want to win with Jakeen. But, having those, I was so caught in that, like, oh, I need to win with with Jon Stewart, the best black heroclix figure ever up to that point, that I didn't really take into account a lot of other elements that were going on. And so when I went and talked with Wes, I have some of my grand realizations from talking with Mace, and I'm like, look, I need a hand figure, and I need some wild cards. And I think this is back before the ATA change. No, it's right when the ATA change happened, where it had to be theme team for you to get you had to be theme team to get ATAs. And so, I said, I need poison and I need the hand ATA, because I just need to not be able to be shot, and I need also a good hand character, or whoever my highest point character is, they have to be able to take a hit and keep on living. And so, again, I made my Worlds team that year, and I had the whole, I would say I had some good runs on the second day of Grinders, and ended up losing to George Massou to try to qualify into top 32. But one of the lessons that I learned in that whole madness thing is that you can put excessive pressures on you, and you can also put unrealistic win conditions on yourself. And those unrealistic win conditions are killer. I really do mean that. And people get really bitter about, oh, I have to win using Magneto from Age of Apocalypse because he, of course, is the best figure ever. And if I lose, then someone was cheating, or, they're just playing cheap figures. Like, you have to let that go. You have to sort of accept things the way they are, and that people are going to play things that have the least amount of liability and have the highest ROI, which is return on interest or return on investment. And so when you look at that, people are going to naturally gravitate to certain things. Okay, so this there's a lot of things that comes in and can hamper creativity or be useful for creativity. And as I start to like just wrap up today's show, the main thing that I would tell you is don't shy away from being creative, but creative teams and heroclix requires time, and if you don't have the time to put in to make a creative team, to start from scratch and boil things down, then you have a choice. You either can try to find the time, or you can start like outsourcing different thoughts to various people, and then trying to come together and sort of Frankenstein something together, and hopefully you can get it all to congeal. And there's nothing wrong with that process either. I mean, truthfully, that's one element where coaching is a huge advantage, is that you start with a general thought process, and then someone else comes in and says, hey, I like where you're starting off. Here's your problems. Think about these things, and you can weigh these options and then go from there. So, yeah, that's it for today's episode. Again, I'm, sorry for no episodes the last few weeks. It's just there's nothing to talk about. And I've been busy. Busy, yeah. Had a lot of great nephew weekends this last few weekends, and his birthday was the 2nd, and so I went and I ordered him a Barney, Baby Bop, and Baby Bop's brother BJ, and I'm not making that up for the name. The brother, the little yellow triceratops, is named BJ. Okay, and so my nephew, whenever he comes over, he looks at the TV where my PlayStation is, and he'll point to it, and he'll say El Marnie or Barney or Elmo. So El Marnie is the combination of Barney and Elmo. I was like, okay, well, he's turning 2. Let me get him the Barney, trio. I had to order it off of Amazon, and it was $50 for these 3 dolls, stuffed dolls, and like half of the dolls that were on Amazon doesn't even look like the official like Barney in the videos. Like that Barney is fat and round and stuff. All these Barneys are like elongated. Like I can't get a freaking plushy fat round Barney. So I went and I found the closest thing I could to that. So of course, like all children, when I presented to him, not on his birthday because the sucker came from the UK, I got it literally the day after his birthday. But he's 2, so he doesn't care. I present my nephew with the Barney, and he in the Baby Bop and the BJ, and he looks at them all. He smiles, hugs all of them, and then he promptly puts them on the table and runs off. As to like, and so the following week happens, and I asked my sister-in-law, I was like, well, is he enjoying the Barney? And she sort of says, and I'm like, it's okay. I understand he's not playing with them at all, is he? He's like, no, he's not. So anyway, that's part of my ventures. And who knows, in 10 years, my nephew will be the Rock World Champion. Yeah, 10 years, my nephew's the Rock World Champion. Calling it now. All right, that's it for today's show. I'd like to thank you all for listening. You can follow me on Twitter at StartOverPod. It came from outer space and told me there are purple dinosaurs out there, but they eat honey lotus, and they also drink nitane extract. You don't want to mess with the nitane extract. You can see the random musings there. You also can find out when a new show is up. And I do recommend people, if you want to find out when a new show is up, that Twitter is the best option instead of the emails. Because YouTube sucks. Stuff happens with YouTube. You got to ring that bell for my notifications to be in your email. and even then, it can be buried in 15 other channels that you put the bell ringing for. So yeah, so go ahead and follow me on Twitter at StartingOverPod. You can email me at startingoverpodcast@gmail.com. That's startingoverpodcast@gmail.com. If you wish to opine, keep it piffy, keep it interesting, keep it awesome, baby. If you are interested in tutoring, then feel free to email me there as well. And I have a current sale going on for all tutoring, and you can check the cool commercial that I have up for the tutoring for more details. You can buy a Phoenix Nest shirt or a Starting Over Podcast shirt in the link below, the TeePublic's link below. And that's about it. I'd like to thank you all for listening. And remember, we all have to start over sometime.